Del Walla Welsham, Abel Ryan, Dewayu, Lakibu, Tebetku, Metlaketla, Dewel Wadku, Juno, Dewel Zogu, Wayawa. Hello, everybody. My name is Abel Ryan. I am of the Wolf clan, or the Lakibu clan. I am from Metlaketla, and I live in Juneau. Let's go. Today we are going to be learning about ovoids and U-shapes and formline and how to draw. A couple things you're going to need. One is a pencil. This is a mechanical pencil. It is quite lovely, but you can make do with a very beautiful number 2 pencil that should look very similar to this. Maybe has a little bit more of an eraser on it. And an extra eraser. Your eraser is your friend, believe me. And some paper. Whatever paper you choose to draw on is fine. And from there we move on. So the first thing we're going to learn about today is the ovoid. It is the primary building block of formline design without question. Formline design is an art form that has thrived and was created between the Columbia River, between Washington and Oregon to the south, and all the way up towards Yakutat and even up into Eyak territory in the north. And in the middle, you have Tsimshian, Haida, Southern Tlingit, Helsa, Hilsaluk, Bella Bella, Bella Coola moving south, etc. There are a lot of tribes involved in the trade of this particular art form. Now, some of the things that are important to this art form that define its shapes and its customs are the shapes. For instance, the ovoid. If you put your hands together like this, you can create an ovoid shape. And if you're looking for the ovoid in other places in nature, you can look no further than your thumb. Here, in my thumbnail, you will see an ovoid shape. Also, in the palm of my hand, you can see an ovoid shape. And we'll get back to this shape in a little bit. But you could also find it not just externally, but you could find it in mushrooms, at the grocery store, for instance, with the little white bell mushrooms or cremini mushrooms, shiitake mushrooms. They're fantastic, and there are plenty. Another place you can find the ovoid is inside of the body. Here is an example of a bone. This is a vertebrae from a brown bear up in Cook Inlet. This is from the lower back area here down near the tail. And as you can see, it is a perfect ovoid shape. This was quite a remarkable thing to find. And this is the primary basis for the ovoid. It is not just some shape that some artist thousands of years ago decided, let's create an art form that will torture future students. No. So, to get started, preferably we're going to draw on some paper because it's not okay to draw on the table. And we're going to take our pencil and we're going to start with some guidelines. We're going to do a top and bottom guideline. And I like to start by just moving my wrist to just get kind of an arc shape. Then when my pencil touches the paper, I leave a slightly curved line. Okay? Now, with that slightly curved line, I will move my hand down and I will draw another one exactly like it down below. Okay? Now, from here, we're going to look at our ovoid again, and we're going to see that we can take and divide this ovoid in half, and we have equal parts on either side, which means that this is a symmetrical shape. So we will take and we will find where the center of our ovoid is going to be, and we are going to lightly mark those places. And then for our side guidelines on either side, we are going to draw a straight line that is going to be parallel to our center line. Parallel meaning if you were to draw these lines on forever, they would never touch. And because we want these to be symmetrical, however far from the center you are on one side, you want to make sure you're about that far on the other. And draw your line in. Okay. Now, we're going to work on this top corner here, and you'll notice that the ovoid is widest at about the middle of its height. So we're going to go ahead and mark that. And then we're going to come back to our top guideline, and we're going to take and put our pencil down and get a running start on our line, coming out and then curving off and down into our side guideline. We're going to try to give this as smooth a transition, a really big curve for this corner. Okay. And then for our bottom, we're going to come down and just past the middle of our ovoid. We're going to come down, breaking off a little bit, and then curving down and over into our bottom guideline. Okay. Now, once you've done one side, we can do the other side. And you can rotate your paper to make this as easy as possible. We're going to move from our side guideline and then curving up into our top guideline, and down into our bottom guideline. Okay. Now, once we've done that, we should have an ovoid shape. And an ovoid shape can vary. It could be taller, it could be shorter, it could be longer. But the rules are still the same. It's still a curved line on top and bottom. Not a big curve, but just a curve. And it's a bigger corner, curved corner in the top, and then transitioning into a smaller corner in the bottom. Very important. Once you have done that, you can go through and erase your fishtails from your guidelines to make it look all pretty. Who doesn't like a pretty ovoid? Now, if you don't like your ovoid, that's okay. This is being drawn in pencil, which means you can go through and make your corrections before you erase. So if you see something you don't like your bottom corner is maybe coming down too far and then up too sharp so it looks uneven, make your correction. And then you can erase your oops. Okay, very important. Now, this would be a great time for you to pause and draw more ovoids to practice so that you can get an idea of how this actually looks and remember how it feels to draw it. Now we're going to move on to what is a formline ovoid. Formline is the forming of lines. Very simple. So to draw a formline ovoid, we have very specific rules to follow, which we're going to follow for a lot of our formline. For our ovoid, our formline ovoid, our top line is going to be thicker. Okay, so we're going to draw another ovoid inside. Our top line is going to be thicker than our bottom line. We get those kind of roughed in a little bit, so you can see that this space here is bigger than this space. And then we're going to round off our corners flowing into this bottom line. Get a running start. We're going to curve right straight into this width here on the bottom. Coming down and curving into that bottom line. Okay, and then we do the same thing on the other side. So that we transition from thin to thick and back down to thin. Okay, we can clean up our guidelines at this point. And we have a formline ovoid. Now, we have an outside edge and an inside edge. And to make this one singular line, we color this in real quickly. And when we color it in, it becomes very clear, especially if you do a good job coloring it in. It will become very clear that you have not two ovoids, but a singular formline ovoid. That has an outside edge and an inside edge. We have our positive space here, which is the line itself, and our negative space, which is inside and outside of our formline ovoid. Okay? Now, we have this space in here that we can fill, and we're going to put in here a secondary ovoid, or a floating ovoid, and it has rules too. We want our floating ovoid to be sitting up higher inside of our ovoid, so that we go from thin up at the top down to thick at the bottom now, and then come back around to thin up on the side and top. Okay? Now, if for some reason your floating ovoid is wider than the top of your ovoid, mine is pretty close, but it's just a little bit over, we need to do something called breaking the line. Okay? And what that means is that this is going to be the thickest place on our design, whatever design we work on. So we're going to take and break up this line here, and I'm going to use the top of this ovoid line here, and then I'm going to break off just inside of that, come across evenly, and make it symmetrical. Okay, so I have another ovoid drawn in here, and then I'm going to draw another one following the same rules. Okay, and then if I color this in, I now have taken this ovoid and broken it up into more positive space and negative space, and ensured that any of the lines inside of the ovoid are not going to be thicker than our primary formline ovoid at the top. Now, our formline ovoid here on the outside, and we have negative space, and then we have our inner ovoid or our floating ovoid here. The floating ovoid is one of the few things in Formline that never touches anything else, but it still needs to have something that anchors it in place. And so we draw a fine line around it, parallel to our floating ovoid, all the way around, because this is how the space that the ovoid occupied was taken care of when it was carved. So it's very important. Okay, so now we have our formline ovoid with our floating ovoid inside. And to create our designs, we will add U-shapes. And for our U-shape, we're going to come out and we're going to draw a line out off the bottom of our ovoid. Okay, and we don't want our U-shape to be longer than our ovoid. It just doesn't quite look right. If it does, it upsets the balance of the shapes and how they fit together. We have another line coming off the top. Okay, and then we want the end of our U shape to be parallel still to the center of our ovoid. So we draw a line here, slightly curved if you want, and we can round off our corners. Top and bottom. Now, if you're wondering how much of a curve these corners should have, they should have about the same curve as the bottom of our formline ovoid. Okay, and once that is drawn in, we can clean up our guidelines, our fishtails. And we have an ovoid, formline ovoid with a U shape coming off of it. Now we need to make this a formline U shape. This too has rules. The top or the end of our U shape is going to be thicker than the legs, but we're going to use our formline ovoid as our measurement. So the top of the U shape should be no thicker than the top of the U shape. It could be a little bit narrower, but it shouldn't be thicker. Okay, so I'm going to put my guideline here. And then the legs of our U shape coming off of this is going to be about the same width as the bottom of our ovoid. And we want our legs to be even, top and bottom. So we draw on another guideline here. Okay. And then we're going to round off from their top into our side guidelines. And then where these U-shapes connect onto our formline ovoid, we're going to come down and we're going to curve dramatically into a fine point. Okay, it still touches on the ovoid, but it's a small connection point. And the same up on the top. I'm going to come in and then curve to a small connection point right here. Okay, very important. And then we can clean this up. We have our formline U shape drawn in. And we're going from thin to thick to thin. Okay? And when we color this in, we have a singular line that has an outside edge and an inside edge creating both positive space and negative space in its existence. So we have our Formline ovoid and our U shape connected, and we have positive space where the lines are and negative space where the lines are not. We're going to fill in this space here with secondary Formline. So we're going to come up off of our ovoid, drawing a fine line or space around the inside of our negative space. Okay, and then we're going to make a Formline U shape. And this does not need to be as thick as our primary Formline. So we draw our U shape in here. The legs don't need to be as thick either, but they still need to be even. Okay, and then we have this space inside of here, which if we were to color this in would be much different color. Our primary Formline, our outside design, would be black, and this would be traditionally red. And then we have through the middle here, we put in a guideline, and we put in another shape starting near the top, coming down one side. When we get down near the bottom of the negative space here, we curve out and into our Formline, primary Formline. We do the same thing on the other side of the half space, and this creates a shape that is called a trigon. Okay, and this divides our space up very well. So we have here in our ovoid, we've drawn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ovoids. And we have here in our U shape, we have drawn 1, 2, 3, 4 U shapes with a representation of a split U here in the center of it. So this is just a fine line here and a fine line around the outside of our floating ovoid. Everything else goes from thin to thick to thin, 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 thin to thick to thin. Okay? That is the basic primary Formline that we will start with when we work on our design. Thank you very much, and I look forward to working with you again shortly.